everybody. This is a personal video diary here just because I'm driving. I'm taking some back roads to get home from Nashville tonight because they're doing some road repaving or something at 840 and I-65. So I'm hoping I can hit US 31 here south of Franklin. Anyway, so busy day in the world of politics. We had our big annual fundraiser for the Tennessee Democratic Party tonight. So just unpacking some thoughts from that. We also had kind of literally well, not literally, but very close to literally at the last minute, a town hall announced, rapid response town hall. It was rapid. Announced with U.S. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from the 5th District of Minnesota, who is apparently a friend of State Representative Justin Jones, who represents part of Nashville. So that was an exciting event. Of course, Representative Omar was in town because she often gets crossways online, or more specifically, our dumbass Congressman Andy Ogles harasses her online. So I shouldn't say that she gets crosswise because she doesn't really do anything wrong. It's totally Andy's bullshit. But anyways, so she came in, which I think was a very gutsy move on her part, to Andy's district to have a town hall about Islamophobia and racism and other issues that are really just being exemplified by our, again, dumbass congressman. And so I was extremely proud of her for coming down and visiting with us in Tennessee, and extremely proud of State Representative Jones. Now, Justin Jones and I admire him tremendously. I think he's been somebody who's definitely stood up for what he believes in the state legislature. Sometimes I don't completely understand what he's thinking, but just because I don't always understand what wavelength he's on doesn't mean he's wrong. It just means I don't understand the wavelength that he's on. But at any rate, I'm tremendously proud of him for getting this put on. I mean, he obviously cares deeply about the just absolutely terrible way that ICE has gone about enforcing immigration law. And they're not really enforcing immigration law. They're just grabbing people. And I think he's correct to say that it's terroristic, what they're doing. It's designed to harass a community that deserves better from us, regardless of what their legal status is in this country. So it was a great event. I mean, obviously, some digs were taken at Andy Ogles, who was very clearly not there. He could have chosen to attend, which would have been an ultimate, power dick move on his part. But of course he didn't, because even though he wants to be perceived as the ultimate power dick, he's really just like a third-rate beta cock. But that's, it is what it is. So, anywho, there was a lot of listening, though. I think there was a lot of empathy. Obviously, I think for Representative Omar to come down to a place that's not even in her district, but not even in her state, I think takes a little bit of courage, really. She didn't know what she was walking into, and I think that she had a pretty great audience. Packed high school auditorium there at Cane Ridge High School in Antioch. I think very relieved to see somebody standing up to do anything. But, again, a lot of empathy, a lot of listening. And I think one point that I will take away from that forever is that she mentioned that even as and she is a tiny little woman too. I was kind of impressed. I thought she would have been taller. But even as a tiny black African immigrant woman with a headscarf, she said she has in-laws who voted for Trump. And, I think that goes to show that There's definitely an appeal to MAGA that transcends a lot of boundary lines, but at the same time, um, you know, it is just a common experience where if you're a Democrat, if you're somebody who's not MAGA, you've got to work with family members who you might disagree with. And that was actually the reason she brought it up, is that she has those awkward conversations at Thanksgiving, just like the rest of us. And, I mean, after saying that, there's no way Andy Ogles or anybody like that is ever going to convince me that Ilhan Omar and I have nothing in common. Actually, we have a lot in common. I always get nervous thinking about going home to spend time with my family at Halloween, just because of the way that politics has become such a divisive issue in our country. Um, so there was that, and but she wasn't the only person who said that tonight. That was the amazing thing. Um, Ken Martin was the keynote speaker at the state Democratic Party dinner. And so, on the one hand, you have this total contrast between the events and the speakers. You have the fact that the town hall was free. The fundraiser obviously was not. It was like $150 a seat. It was a little pricey even for me, and I'm comfortably middle class. Um, it Obviously, Ilhan Omar, as I said, tiny little African immigrant woman, and Ken Martin, who's not exactly a giant, but a little bigger, a white dude from southern Minnesota whose in-laws are farmers and stuff, and grew up poor in Minnesota. And Ken Martin talked about how his relatives, some of them, in fact, I think it's his father-in-law who he mentioned, is voting Republican, and it's because of just a lot of symbolic things. It's not really a clear policy. It's just a perception that the Democrats have stopped caring about working people. And, obviously Ken Martin and Ilhan Omar both, I think, are deeply committed to trying to fix that perception. Ken Martin may not be the most terribly popular person in the world right now because he's got one of the most unenviable jobs. He's the chair of the DNC at a time when the DNC and the whole consultant class, the whole sort of elite of the Democratic Party are just held in absolute contempt by so much of our base. Being the guy who gets hired right after a big loss in any area of life is never going to be fun. And it's been reported that Ken Martin broke down crying over the David Hogg thing. I mean, a lot of people I think are upset about the way that David Hogg was treated. Although, to be honest, I think I agree with David Hogg that we need younger members of Congress. I also think he kind of was a jerk about it. But at any rate, I like Ken Martin, and I didn't get to talk to him tonight, but I had talked to him a couple of years ago when he came to visit. He was DNC chairman at the time, or vice chairman at the time. He hadn't become chair yet. And so as vice chair, he came down to the UAW hall in Spring Hill and was talking to folks there at the UAW Fall Fest a couple of years ago, where we had a booth for the County Democratic Party. And he just seems like a very nice, genuine guy. And I think he gave a very nice, genuine guy sort of speech tonight. I think he obviously sees real challenges for Democrats. But again, the idea that there's somehow this establishment versus anti-establishment war within the Democratic Party was really put to the test in my mind this afternoon and this evening by the fact that you had both Ilhan Omar and Ken Martin both point out that they have to have uncomfortable conversations with family members who don't support Democrats at Thanksgiving. And I think both of them were very much pushing us. Go out and have conversations with your neighbors, your friends. Politics begins with relationships. And we can talk till we're blue in the face about it's all about messaging. If we just use this adverb or this series of nouns and prepositions, we would win all 50 states. No, we wouldn't. It doesn't really matter if we call them, it matters to a certain extent whether we call it school choice or vouchers. Obviously, I prefer vouchers because I think school choice is a total dipshit propaganda term. But like, I mean, the fact of the matter is, whether we call people illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants or whatever, is, people aren't totally stupid. They can see through that. It's what matters is building relationships, and people knowing that you're on their side, regardless of how you choose to name things. Um, and so I think that's something that definitely as a party we need to do. And Ken Martin, I think, did an excellent job of speaking to the fact that we really need to rebuild our grassroots, starting with things like school board races. And as a county party chair, where we're in the middle of having a conversation about whether to call a primary or not, that really spoke to me. I mean, he made a comment tonight too that really spoke to me, which is he said that county party chairs are a little bit like fire hydrants because they just get peed on all the time. And he said that a little more artfully than I just put it. It was a little more poetic coming out of his mouth than it did coming out of mine. But the sentiment was there, regardless of how exactly he constructed it. And it spoke to me. Now, I'm not going to say every speech went great at Three Star Dinner. Our one Democratic congressman from Tennessee, Steve Cohen, he seems like a very nice guy. I don't really know him that well. We had a very brief interaction where he was looking for his table, and I offered to help, and he politely declined, and that's cool. He seems like a nice guy, is all I'm getting at. But, he gave a speech, kind of the lead-in for Ken Martin's keynote, where he was sort of trying to defend his caucus from what I think he very clearly knows is a sense of frustration from the Democratic Party base. And, he talked about how great a leader Hakeem Jeffries is. I mean, he didn't do it with the sort of enthusiasm that reminded me of like Baghdad Bob or something, like some like spokesperson for a dictator or something. Like I think he genuinely believes what he's saying. Like, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, like, he wouldn't be saying these things if he didn't already know that people didn't want to hear them, which is, kind of one of those, like, paradoxical things in politics. Like, sometimes you got to say stuff just because people want you to say something else. But, he was like, we're doing the best we can. We're filing legislation. We're giving 8-hour speeches. And I'm like, that's great. But, I got to say, I'm not terribly impressed. And it finally got to the point where somebody at one of the tables next to us started heckling Steve Cohen and was basically screaming, shut it down, shut it down. Frustration over the government shutdown debacle thing. I mean, it didn't shut down, but probably should have earlier this year. And I felt a little bad for Steve Cohen, because he's sort of in this impossible situation of defending his colleagues even when they're not popular. But I mean, I think there definitely is tension between the base and our politicians. I just don't think, circling back to what I said about Ilhan Omar and Ken Martin, I don't think there's that much tension between our politicians, aside from usual petty personal bullshit that is like every political party in the history of humanity. I think generally everybody sees themselves as part of the same team. I think everybody sees themselves as contributing in some way. I mean, I think there's always a few people who are just genuine assholes, like John Fetterman, who are not making any friends right now. But even like Jeanne Shaheen, who said that really dumb thing, like, no, we're a war party or something the other day. Even Jeanne Shaheen's probably like aware of which team she's on, and it isn't going to go actively like knifing her colleagues in the back. So it's good to see our people more or less on the same page. But yeah, I mean, I still think we need some generational change. Malcolm Kenyatta gave a fantastic speech. He really had a lot of what the kids would call riz. He brought the fire. And I would very much prefer to see someone like Malcolm Kenyatta occupying the U.S. Senate seat that John Fetterman currently is occupying, because we need people who are going to speak truth to power, not coddle it. So So there's that. Let's see, other things. Knox County won the One to Watch award. Mad props to our brothers in Knox County, and brothers and sisters in Knox County, um, siblings of non-specific gender in Knox County, um, on their big win. Um, I think that Chair Campbell, Rachel Campbell, gave a wonderful speech as chair. Um, we also had kind of the cattle call, including some excessively long speeches from some of the congressional candidates. In the fifth district, we had Jim Torino, Joyce Neal, and Mike Cortez. I have to remain neutral in that race, so I will just say they all gave good speeches. I think Jim Torino is someone who really wants to emphasize standing up to bullies. Dr. Joyce Neal definitely has a good resume with her work, um, with mental health and as a veteran in the military. And Mike Cortez, I thought, gave a fine speech, leaning sort of into economic populism and his history. And we actually share the experience of growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for a few years in the 1980s. Although my family was just kind of in and out. My dad had a job at the hospital there for a few years, but Mike's originally from that area, so we talked a little bit about that. Also had some good side conversations, met some people, saw good friends. Seventh district, great to see all the major candidates there. They've got 3 state representatives running for Congress in that district, and I think. In addition to that, there's another guy too, but actually 2 other guys. There's 5 candidates total who spoke from the 7th district. And no matter who wins, I think they will have an excellent candidate there for the special election. So definitely an encouraging night. I will say the 3-star dinner this evening was actually better than most of the ones that I've attended. They all tend to go a little over time, and this one was no different. It didn't wrap up until about 9:30. I think it might have wrapped up a little sooner than it did last year when Jamie Raskin spoke. And don't get me wrong, I love Jamie Raskin. He's one of my favorite members of Congress, but gosh darn, last year he just went on and on and on about every subject under the sun. I don't even remember all the subjects, but I remember he started going into a discussion about like Puerto Rican statehood or something, and I agreed with him. Don't get me wrong; it's just like, you're in Tennessee, buddy. You don't need to start talking about Puerto Rican statehood. I think that the speeches were all very on point. Vice Chair Higdon gave a good point, and there was a common theme. A lot of what Vice Chair Nathan Higdon, the TNDP Vice Chair, said really overlapped with what Ken Martin said. And I don't think that was necessarily their intention. There was obviously a little bit of a difference in tone. I think Higdon's speech was maybe a little more adversarial or partisan, in the sense that it was kind of like, fight, fight, fight. And, Ken Martin was more like, his was partisan and adversarial too, but maybe not as much. But in terms of the actual content, they were both emphasizing the importance of grassroots organizing. I will say probably the one speech that really blew me away that whole dinner, aside from Malcolm Kenyatta, who gave a real stemliner, was probably the land acknowledgement by obviously Native American guy. I believe he said that he was, I can't remember if it was Sioux or Apache, and it may have been a mix of both. I mean, there are folks who have complicated heritage, but nevertheless, he really gave, I think, an inspiring speech about the importance of standing up. And I think the key point was, we're still here, and he let us all in kind of a Native American war chant. which was interesting. But it definitely was very high energy, and I tremendously appreciated it. As the night went on, I'm not calling Ken Martin's speech boring. It just had the unfortunate distinction of being the last in a very long series of speeches by other people. So, by the time Ken Martin's speech rolled around, I definitely needed coffee. I finally stopped and got this in Franklin before I started recording this video. So, anyways, lots of speechifying here tonight. Again, key point to take away is I think that, at least for those of us who are activists or politicians, people who might be considered the inside of the party, we all have a lot more in common, perhaps, than people think we do. Like, again, what I said about Thanksgiving and Ilhan Omar and Ken Martin. There's obviously a disconnect right now between the base and at least some members of Congress, like I mentioned with Steve Cohen and him getting heckled. I think that there's a lot of energy at the grassroots, and the real question in 2026 is that energy going to be put to effective use? Are people going to be led in a direction that actually makes change? And so, as somebody who's kind of in, I sort of think of myself as a county party chair, something like middle management, or like the assistant to the regional manager or something like. Um, a lot of that unfortunately falls on us. I think I've never served in the military, but my mother and my stepfather and several other members of my family have. It's a little bit like those, non-commissioned officers or junior officers who, actually have to lead the charge in battle and don't get the pleasure of getting to sit the war out in a, bunker somewhere. It's going to be a challenging year. Actually, well, more than a year, but about 16 months for us. Nevertheless, I'm looking forward to it. If I can just stay awake, again, lots of coffee. And, something else that Ken Martin said, he's been visiting a lot of states, and he said he's gotten tired of lukewarm hotel coffee. And, so say we all. Cheers.